Edith slowly walked up to the front, her finger pointing towards the map as she spoke with a serious tone. The terrain of Hermes is extremely unique, creating a gentle slope with its mountain ranges. The new holy city is situated atop a plateau, but the environment here is incredibly harsh. While the natural barriers can help the church fend off demonic beasts, this place itself is not suitable for living, let alone farming. Edith paused for a moment before continuing her explanation. This means that they must rely on external resources, especially food. Every autumn, dozens of caravans from the four kingdoms arriving each day, all for the sole purpose of supplying the new holy city. She then concluded, in other words, if the church planned to dispatch their army, the merchants would certainly notice. According to the changes in the scale of material transportation, they can then estimate the time of their deployment. Edith's tone was firm and displayed confidence, which was exceedingly rare among women of this era. Everyone in the room was surprised. Roland pondered inwardly. It seems that Calvin's description of Edith in his letter wasn't entirely an exaggeration. Edith expressed a deep interest in Roland's First Army's tactics, eager to understand how Roland's troops had managed to breach the old royal capital within a single day. She also hoped to learn through observation, aiming to better assist Roland in the upcoming battles. Roland agreed and instructed Axe to make the necessary arrangements. Sylvie's expression revealed her deep concerns. She believed this might be an exceptionally tough battle and suggested notifying Tilly, hoping that the witch from Slumbering Isle could lend Roland a helping hand. Roland couldn't help but smile bitterly upon hearing Sylvie's suggestion. The situation on Slumbering Isle was not much better than his own. There had been no news since Roland informed Tilly about the Blood Fawn. If Tilly were to bring the witches to aid him without resolving the internal conflicts, Slumbering Isle might fall into greater turmoil. However, Roland also knew that going against the Pure Ones with their strange abilities, witches indeed provided the most effective countermeasure. Eventually, Roland nodded in agreement, saying that he will be writing a letter to Tilly. Agatha then offered her suggestion, advising that all soldiers of the First Army were the Stone of God punishments. She explained that throughout the hundreds of years of history in the Federation, there had been a few powerful witches with inconceivable abilities. Against such witches, ordinary people without Stone of God punishments were utterly powerless, and a single witch of that caliber could claim the lives of thousands. Barav raised a practical question, asking, where can they find so many Stone of God punishments all of a sudden? Roland responded saying they could get them from the church. As he spoke, a cold smirk appeared on his face. It's time to uproot the enemy's power, just like breaking off a venomous snake's fangs. As night fell, Wendy gathered all the witches together in her bedroom. When everyone's attention was focused on her, she informed them that the church was on its way and recounted the details of the meeting. After a brief silence, Rem whispered her willingness to stay by the factory all day to provide Roland with electricity. Lily followed by gently pinching Rem's cheek, warmly reminding her, if she wears herself out, Roland will be more worried, and will have to send someone to take care of her. Their interaction elicited a round of light laughter, easing the tension in the room. Rem's initiative sparked a wave of responses from the other witches. Evelyn said she would produce as much alcohol as possible to contribute her part. The atmosphere in the room gradually became more positive. They were not overwhelmed by fear, but rather, they were preparing for battle. Seeing everyone's reaction, Wendy felt a slight relief in her heart. Although the witches had their concerns, none showed fear of battling the church, a scenario that was unimaginable a year ago. Taking a deep breath to quiet the room, Wendy spoke earnestly, telling everyone that this war is crucial for the future of the Witch Union. Asking them if they ever thought about what it would mean for them if His Majesty ultimately defeats the church. The room fell silent, but their eyes shimmered with an indescribable light. Wendy continued slowly, within the kingdom of Grey Castle, and perhaps across the entire continent, witches will be able to live in peace. Under His Majesty Roland's rule, they might even have the chance to create a new world alongside ordinary people, enjoying peace and equality. She added with a smile, of course, knowing His Majesty's usual style, he would probably prefer everyone to continue working as usual and not overworking. Though Wendy could not deliver a rousing speech to the soldiers like Roland, she shared her heartfelt thoughts with everyone.
Finally, Wendy looked at each and everyone present and said sincerely, this is their common home, and it's a crucial moment to change their fate.
She is willing to give her all for it. With that, she extended her hand, palm down, signaling everyone to pledge together. Scroll was the first to place her hand on Wendy's, followed by Nightingale and Anna. Agatha, gently pulled over by Leaf, hesitated for a moment before also placing her hand on top. The witches formed a circle, each one placing their hand on top of the others. Even the two previous Bloodfawn witches, Iffy and Shadowfeather, who had been hesitant, gathered their courage under everyone's smiling gaze and truly became a part of the group. Together, they shouted in unison, for the Witch Union, for King Roland, for the Eternal Holy Mountain. Their voices were firm and powerful, echoing through the room. After everyone left, the bedroom gradually became silent, leaving only Wendy and Nightingale. Turning around, Wendy noticed that Nightingale had quietly opened the window and was standing there, her figure slightly melancholic under the moonlight. Slowly walking to her side, Wendy gently asked if Nightingale was also worried about the upcoming war. Nightingale took a deep breath, her voice low yet full of confidence. Nightingale has waited a long time to take revenge on the church. Perhaps other witch sisters who died unjustly at the hands of the church must also be looking forward to this day. Hearing Nightingale's words, a surge of deep emotions welled up in Wendy's heart. She reached out and gently touched Nightingale's face, holding her hands, looking into Nightingale's eyes, telling her to protect Roland, also remember to protect herself as well. Nightingale slowly closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of Wendy's touch, and tightly hugged her. Upon the issuance of the war order, the city of Neverwinter swiftly transitioned into a state of wartime preparedness, with everyone making urgent preparations for the upcoming battle. A large quantity of wheat from Dragon Fall Ridge was quickly transported to the granaries. Part of the wheat was processed into dry rations for the soldiers by hulling and milling. Firearms and ammunition were also being urgently prepared, and the new recruits had completed their basic training and were ready to engage in combat. Considering the moderate intensity of this operation, Roland decided to dispatch a force of 1,500 soldiers, commanded by Axe. Considering the possibility of encountering the Pure Ones, Sylvie and Iffy were also set to join the expedition. Brian approached, saying the location of the battle had not been decided. Roland wanted to hear the opinion of the First Army. Brian considered engaging within the Western Territory. This could leverage their firepower advantage and logistical support with a massive amount of steamboats able to transport soldiers and ammunition to the front line in less than one day. As for the church, due to the long distance, if the war dragged on for more than a month, the church's forces would starve to death. However, Roland did not find this plan feasible, as the church still had significant influence in Greycastle, and a large number of believers could provide support to them. Edith shared her concerns, fearing that if the situation turned unfavorable, the church might force the citizens of Greycastle to consume the pills, using commoners to deplete the strength of the First Army. She is aware that Roland wants to win the war, while also ensuring the safety of the citizens of Greycastle. She suggested that the attack should be conducted outside the territory of Greycastle. Brian, however, believed that Edith lacked a sufficient understanding of firearms. He was worried that if the battle site was too far away and the ammunition was exhausted, logistical support could not be guaranteed, making it difficult to continue the war. Both of them hold different views and neither is able to persuade the other. Edith firmly believed that the civilians of Greycastle must be protected and spared from the ravages of war. Seeing their debate, Roland suggested why not concentrate the troops and supplies in advance to the border cities? Brian said they could not predict from which direction the church would launch their attack. Roland, however, analyzed from a strategic perspective, believing that they could guide the enemy to attack from the expected direction through a series of strategies. Seeing Roland pointing to the map, Edith suddenly mentioned the Coldwind Ridge. Roland nodded, suggesting that they could concentrate supplies in Coldwind Ridge and station the First Army in the nearby town of Misty Valley. This would force the church to attack from this direction. Brian asked in confusion. Edith explained that Coldwind Ridge was very close to the Holy City, and by concentrating their forces there, they could create an illusion for the church, making them believe that an offensive was imminent, thereby forcing the church to concentrate its forces there and achieving the goal of guiding the enemy's direction of attack.
Brian raised another concern: what if the church chose not to attack from Coldwind Ridge? Roland responded calmly, then the Hermes holy city will be razed to the ground.
Surrounded by raging flames, Anna watched in panic. The red fire devoured everything around her, and the scalding air stung her skin as flames danced chaotically.
Thick smoke rolled below the ceiling, making it nearly impossible to breathe.
Anna wanted to help but found herself powerless. She could hear screams from inside the house, while neighbors rushed to fight the fire. Suddenly, a man approached her, his gaze stern as he questioned Anna about the whereabouts of her mother and brother. Instead of offering comfort, he roughly grabbed her shoulders, slapping her face repeatedly. The pain and fear jolted Anna awake, and she found herself in bed, gasping for breath. The harsh scolding seemed to echo in her ears, lingering. Anna tried to calm herself, quickly gulping down a glass of cold water from her bedside table. Her breathing steadied as she dressed and freshened up before heading to the witch's building. Upon arriving, Ling waved and greeted her warmly, while Wendy complimented the beautiful weather and asked if Anna planned to visit North Slope Mountain.
Anna exchanged brief greetings, saying she would be heading there later this afternoon. When the two jokingly asked if she was planning to go on a date with Roland, Anna smiled and simply shook her head, not elaborating further.
Wendy didn't press further. Wendy handed Anna 2 gold coins. This was her salary for the month. With her payment in hand, Anna returned to the castle's main hall, where Carter was waiting. She handed one of the coins to him. Carter asked if it was the usual arrangement.
Anna nodded. During the renovation of the border town, all the original residents, including Anna's father, were allocated a house. However, since he sold Anna to the church for 25 gold, she had cut all ties with this man. Despite this, there were some matters Anna could not completely avoid. The gold in her hand, for example. Her father, due to gambling, fraud, and theft, had exhausted his money in just half a year, falling into abject poverty. Carter approached a dilapidated room and knocked on the door. A man opened the door, smiling broadly as he invited Carter in for tea. However, Carter shook his head, his expression serious and a glimpse of disgust as he handed over the money, explaining it was the man's living expenses for the month. Meanwhile, Anna leaned against the hallway wall, sighing softly to herself, feeling that she could not burden Roland any further. When Carter returned, he patted his chest, assuring Anna that everything was taken care of. Anna sincerely thanked Carter, asking him not to tell Roland about it. Carter nodded in understanding. Anna then turned and walked down the stairs. After nearly 4 months, Lien set foot in the border town once again. Noticed the town had undergone drastic changes, the population had increased and the atmosphere was more lively. Lien and Honey rushed to the riverbank, diving straight into a day of hard work. When the last massive stone finally settled firmly into the ground, Lien wiped the sweat from her forehead. Honey clapped her hands in admiration, exclaiming, Lien had managed to carve a path through the mountain. Lien responded with a proud smile, there's nothing she can't do. After the work was finished, Honey asked if Lien had brought any fire-starting tools, suggesting they could catch fish and have a barbecue right here. However, Lien shook her head, saying she had enough of grilled fish on Slumbering Isle. Although Honey still seemed tempted by the idea of fish, Lien informed her that she shouldn't dry fish here either, and Lien thought Roland might not appreciate the taste of salted fish either. Suddenly, Lien thought of Ash, wondering if she was still frequently troubled by various fish soups on Slumbering Isle. Lien's gaze swept over the future port construction site, thinking that soon they would be able to welcome Tilly here. Honey was happy to hear Tilly would also be here helping Roland with the upcoming war. Looking at the innocent Honey, Lien thought to herself, this child really knows nothing about war. If Tilly can't solve the issue with the Bloodfawn back on Slumbering Isle and the church launches a full-scale attack on Roland, that would be real trouble. Still, she hoped that Tilly and everyone else could come back to the border town and, preferably, stay here forever. That way, the wish she made during winter could come true.
On the bustling docks, everything was proceeding according to plan and in an orderly fashion. 1,500 First Army soldiers participating in the upcoming operation were boarding the warships, ready to set sail. Meanwhile, in accordance with the plan confirmed at the strategic meeting, an additional 4,000 soldiers from the First Army were transporting ammunition and food, preparing to head to the Northern Territories. Edith had promised to personally write a letter to her father, providing half of the warehouse stock for the soldiers' use, and said the Lord of the Misty Valley town had also stated that he would fully support all the needs of the First Army. Looking at the busy docks, Roland asked Edith if she had any plans to return to the north. Edith shook her head, expressing her preference to accompany the First Army and participate in all upcoming battles. She stood by the ship's rail, gently lifting her long hair, then made a gesture of respect, asking Roland to take care of her younger brother. Roland nodded in agreement, promising to take good care of Cole. The sea breeze gently lifted Edith's long hair. She looked deeply at Roland, telling him that when the Great War came, she would wait for him in Misty Valley town. As the ship gradually sailed away, Nightingale couldn't help but express her discontent, thinking that Edith was treating this life-and-death situation as if arranging a romantic date with a lover. Roland felt a bit awkward, realizing that Nightingale still had some grudges from the letter Duke Calvin had sent. He asked Nightingale about the reliability of what Edith had just said. Reluctantly, Nightingale nodded, confirming that Edith was truthful both in expressing her loyalty to Roland and in discussing the battle plans. Roland breathed a sigh of relief, feeling reassured. He gently held onto Nightingale's hand, and the two of them returned to the castle together. Roland gazed pensively at the map, realizing that they would have another port built very soon. Next, they would need to start building houses, warehouses, and a temporary dock. Not long after, Maisie hurried into the office while pecking the window, holding a sealed letter. Roland quickly opened the letter, his eyes swiftly scanning every word in the letter. He fell into deep thought and then gave Maisie an order: bring Sylvie along and then catch up with the fleet as quickly as possible. Also, tell Iffy to act according to the plan. Meanwhile, the fleet had arrived at the suburban docks by the Crimson Water City, causing a stir. The guards returned to the city gates were tightly shut, and the drawbridge over the moat was raised. Seeing this, Brian asked if they should blast the city gate open. Axe shook his head, indicating that their target was solely the church. They did not wish to make enemies with the local lords and decided to first go through diplomatic procedures, submitting the relevant documents. Edith stepped forward, volunteering to be the envoy. As the Duke's daughter, she is more than qualified to be the envoy. Brian expressed his concerns for her safety, and Axe decided to dispatch a squad of soldiers to accompany her. Axe then said that if a conflict arose, they would attack at all costs. Edith and the soldiers went to the city gate together and submitted their credentials. After a tense half-hour wait, the city gates finally opened slowly, and the drawbridge was lowered. A chubby middle-aged man came out. He was the Lord of Crimson Water City. He warmly invited everyone into the city, while Axe directly addressed the issue, mentioning the church's treasonous actions as well as the tragedies in the two other kingdoms. The Lord nodded, but his gaze unconsciously lingered on Edith. He then invited everyone to join him in an evening banquet. Brian was prepared to politely decline the invitation to a banquet, but he found that Edith had already accepted and stated that they would attend. However, they would need to complete their mission assigned by King Roland first. As the First Army marched into the city in a neat formation under the guidance of the knights, suddenly, a commotion and the sound of stones hitting the ground broke the silence. Axe immediately raised his arm, giving the command, "All troops, be on guard." The soldiers quickly took out their weapons, ready for battle. Just then, Maisie and Sylvie rushed over in a hurry, shouting that there was a magical reaction ahead. Brian shouted urgently, telling the chubby lord to have his knights quickly get out of the way. But before he could finish his sentence, a group of church believers dressed in black robes charged out from around the corner, attacking the guiding knights. The impact of the attackers was astonishing. Even the horses were knocked down by their charge. The knights quickly engaged in battles with the attackers. The chubby lord was initially stunned by this sudden scene, but then he became furious, shouting loudly, "Damn it, eliminate all these rebels." However, a massive rock dropped from the sky made him quickly shut his mouth. Everyone then saw a woman with green hair using her magic to control the massive stones on the ground, hurling them at the knights like bullets. Seeing this, Axe immediately ordered to open fire. Continuous gunfire echoed through the streets, and bullets poured down like raindrops, hitting the witch. As the witch fell to the ground, the chubby lord, still somewhat in shock, saw the witch on the ground. Although he had heard the church was raising witches, now, having witnessed with his own eyes, he was in disbelief. Axe didn't pay him any attention and ordered the troops to continue advancing. They quickly dealt with the remaining attacking believers, and Brian led a squad of soldiers into the church, swiftly eliminating the resistance inside. Afterward, they began searching the church according to His Majesty's orders. All documents, letters, and supplies were meticulously seized. When they finally opened the thick iron door to the basement, they saw that it was filled with boxes, and inside the boxes were piles of gold coins and stone of god punishments. Meanwhile, in Slumbering Isle, the gray clouds hung low, mirroring Heidi Morgan's heavy heart. Amidst the flashes of lightning and the roars of thunder, her thoughts became increasingly chaotic. It had been over 2 months since Iffy and Shadowfeather left, and there had been no word from them, leaving her feeling puzzled and anxious. If the distance was the issue, they could have easily threatened Honey and forced her animal messengers to send a message. Heidi couldn't help but wonder what kind of accident had happened. Agitated, she closed the window, blocking out the howling sea wind. The situation on Slumbering Isle was gradually turning against her. Since Tilly's return, the non-combat witches had all sided with her, putting Heidi under tremendous pressure. These witches, usually weak and powerless, were now rapidly rising in status, and there were even signs of them confronting the combat witches. Just then, a red-haired woman hurried in, her voice anxious, bringing bad news. As Heidi's most loyal assistant, she rarely showed such a flustered demeanor, which made Heidi feel somewhat uneasy. The woman reported, "A new witch has come to Slumbering Isle, her name is Annie." After hearing this, Heidi remained indifferent. Saying new witches arrived frequently, and she didn't think much of it. However, the red-haired woman earnestly added, saying she had seen her before, Annie was from the Wolfheart Kingdom. Heidi's heart skipped a beat, quickly realizing that this new witch might be a witch rejected by the Blood Fawn. A trace of unease rose in her heart. She asked if it was just a coincidence of the same name. The red-haired woman shook her head. Although she wasn't entirely certain at first, after seeing Annie with her own eyes, she was convinced that it was indeed Annie from years ago. Her impression of Annie was exceptionally deep because the witch who had accompanied Annie back then was Iffy. After hearing this, Heidi abruptly grabbed the woman's collar, questioning her if she had let Annie go. The woman quickly denied it, emphasizing that she had acted strictly according to Heidi's instructions. Heidi stared into her eyes, searching for any traces of lying. After a while, she slowly let go and calmly asked for the details of the situation. The woman took a deep breath and explained that Annie was ill, and her condition seemed quite serious. Heidi pondered for a moment, then ordered the woman to bring Nightfall over and also tell Shaji to have a look, since Annie had never seen Shaji before. Outside, the rain poured down heavily, the dense raindrops beating against the window, creating a dull sound. Heidi sat silently at the table, the atmosphere in the room oppressively tense, while the other two stood by, quietly waiting for her instructions. Suddenly, there were hurried footsteps outside the door. The door opened and closed, and Shaji returned to report that Annie was asleep. However, it seems like Annie's condition was not very optimistic. The cold plague had invaded her lungs, and it seemed that the disease had persisted for some time. Heidi's face darkened, and she asked in a cold tone, questioning what was Camilla planning to do? Shaji answered that Camilla planned to send Annie to a border town in the Western Territory. Heidi immediately realized that once Annie went to the western regions and met up with Iffy, everything Heidi had done could be exposed, which was absolutely unacceptable to her. Heidi suppressed her anger and turned to Nightfall, speaking in a cold voice, questioning if Nightfall could ensure that Annie stays asleep forever. Nightfall hesitated slightly and answered that although she could do it with her ability seed of peaceful death, she didn't understand why it was necessary. Heidi impatiently interrupted her, saying Annie is a traitor to the blood fawn, and Nightfall doesn't need to know the specific reasons.
Nightfall was not convinced and seemed very confused. She asked why not wait for Tilly to come back and decide? The consequences could be unimaginable if someone found out about it. A dangerous glint flashed in Heidi's eyes as she slammed the table, asking if Nightfall was trying to defy her will? With a slight tremble in her body, Nightfall eventually acquiesced to Heidi's request, assuring that she would listen to Heidi's command. Seeing this, a subtle smile played across Heidi's lips. She further inquired if Nightfall could control the timing of her powers, specifically requesting that her abilities take effect right after Annie is put on the boat. Although hesitant, Nightingale eventually nodded in agreement. Pleased, Heidi decided it was time to pay a visit to Annie. Accompanied by the Blood Fawn members, Heidi found Camilla sitting outside of Annie's room. With a tone of concern, Heidi expressed that they had heard about a witch from Wolfheart Kingdom and wanted to check on her condition. Camilla tried to dissuade them, explaining that Annie was already asleep and should not be disturbed. However, Heidi's patience was wearing thin. With a threat in her tone, she directly stated that she was familiar with the name and suggested that perhaps they knew this witch. Faced with Heidi's persistence, Camilla appeared somewhat frightened and eventually, albeit reluctantly, led them inside the room.